morning, everyone. Smash up the like, smash up the likes. It is another beautiful Thursday morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. We got a special guest just coming in. Welcome, everyone, to an exciting edition of Random Topic Thursdays. In our segment, of course, if y'all remember, I started a podcast eventually called Un-Soul-Ved, or Un-Soul-Ved, I should say, rather. I don't want to get a copyright strike from Robert Stack from the Dead for saying that. But we are going to be talking about, of course, I've done videos on this before. If you remember a few years ago, I did a video on both the deaths of Sam Cooke and Otis Redding, two geniuses of soul music who died very suddenly. And of course, there's always been questions and circumstances surrounding their death. And of course, for today, we're going to be going back to Sam Cooke and what happened to him on December 10th of 1964, over 60 years ago, where a lot of questions still remain unsolved. That's why it's called this Un-Soul-Ved, UNSOULVED, because he was the king of soul. In fact, Sam Cooke was, let me put my camera on, I'm sorry. There we go. Y'all get to see the new beard. Sam Cooke was actually was called the King of Soul for a reason. He actually was one of the first inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986. The original lineup, along with the likes of people such as Chuck Berry, Little Richard, I think Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, I think I said Little Richard, Fats Domino, and there's a couple of others off the top of my head. If I can't think of it, forgive me. But of course, he was a legend. James Brown was another one. And he's a legend. Of course, he's a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And his influence remains impactful even 60 years after his passing, because many people still listen to his music. And his music is still heard universally worldwide, especially with songs like A Change Is Gonna Come, Twisting the Night Away, You Send Me, and Having a Party, which is my personal favorite. But there's a bunch. And joining me today, we're going to have the author, B.G. Rhule, who is who's out on the East Coast. B.G. actually is the author of 3 books. Of course, 2 of them. I got to turn the music off so we can hear the guests talk, because I know it might be distracting. Sorry. But B.G. is the author of 3 books, especially 2 on Sam Cooke. One, most latest book is Sam Cooke, The Truth. She also did a book that was released in 2013 called Sam Cooke, One More River to Cross. And she's also an author, and I haven't read this one yet, BG, but you are also the author of the book on Lou Rawls' life, too, an autobiography on Lou Rawls. And I'm going to mention briefly, Lou Rawls, and for those that don't know, Lou Rawls and Sam Cooke were actually very close friends. So everybody welcome Miss B.G. Rhule to the show. Good morning, B.G.
Good morning, Gavin. It's great to be here with you.
It's great to be here with you too, especially I know we had, and especially talking to you now in person, even though virtually rather than through email. So thank you for coming on and talking about your book. And so you have 3 books, including 2 on Sam Cooke and Lou Rawls. And if I'm not mistaken, can you correct me if I'm wrong? In your first book on Sam Cooke, isn't it true that you had Lou Rawls' son write the foreword?
No. Lou Rawls' son, Lou Jr., who passed away 2 years ago, actually this month.
Yeah.
Tragically, I'm not over that yet. He and I worked together on a screenplay on his dad, and then I wrote the book with his mom, Lana, and Love is a Hurtin' Thing, which is now just on Kindle. The book industry is very rugged right now. If you self-publish, just to give you an example, a few years back, it was $1,000 just to get 100 books. So, you really don't make a profit on that by the time you spend money on shipping and everything else. The book on Sam Cooke, The Truth, we still have some physical copies, but most people get the audiobook. Most people like to listen as they drive or whatever. And that one seems to be selling a little bit more, and I make a couple of dollars on that. But it's not, it's not, I have to say I've lost money on Sam Cooke. It's not like some people have claimed to be relatives of Sam Cooke and have, opportuned themselves into a small fortune. But I, on the other hand, who sought to tell the truth about Sam Cooke, has actually lost money. But I don't care because I didn't go into it for the money. I wanted to tell the truth of the story. And I got to know the family. And then Lou Jr. was somebody I got to know very early on, because back in the early 2000s, you could kind of scour Facebook and find, relatives of famous people.
Oh, yeah.
Here. And Lou got back to me right away and said, I'm his godson. I'm his only godchild. And he always felt that something huge was taken from him in Sam's death. And he really was fascinated by the things that I found out about how Sam died, why he died. And he was so bitter and so angered about it.
Sure.
Well, I don't want to get into Lou's story particularly right now because we're here to talk about Sam, but Sam and Lou did grow up together in the Brownsville section of Chicago. Reverend Rawls often had Lou at the table, the dinner table. His mom cooked for the whole neighborhood. That's just the Cooke family, very gracious and hospitable people, a very highly educated group of people, I might add, very bright people, and very spiritual. The religion is quite a thing in their family. And Lou was not, his father was not around. His mother was kind of going through she was a party girl for a while, let's just put it that way. And he was being raised by his grandmother, and his grandmother thought it would be great to have Lou go over to the Reverend Cooke's house and get some churching. And they both sang in church choirs, as so many people did back then who came up in the industry. They started in gospel and crossed over.
Right. Just like all the Motown stars, the Temptations, they were singing in the church. Aretha Franklin, a bunch of people, Smokey Robinson, all of them grew up, especially in soul music, black music. And it was very controversial if you were a gospel artist and then transitioned to pop, which what Sam did when he made his first song, hit song, You Send Me. That is one of my I love that song too. While I got you on here, I'm going to ask you too, what is your favorite Sam Cooke song? Wow.
Oh my God, that's almost impossible to answer. There are so many. Touch the Hem of His Garment is my favorite gospel song, I think.
Okay.
Be With Me, Jesus is another one I love. Oh God, they're all so good. I think Bring It On Home to Me, when that comes on the radio, I always have a smile on my face because I know the story about how that was recorded. That I can't share with you here because it's in the books. You've got to read about it. But well, I'll tell you just very broadly. Lou was scared when he went into a recording studio. He just got the heebie-jeebies about recording. He was great with a live audience. He was fine there, but you put a microphone and people behind the booth in there, and he just, I don't know, what it was. And Sam recognized that, so he gave him a little bit of Jack Daniels before that that recording, and didn't get him in the studio till like the last minute because he didn't want him to focus on it too much, just get in there and sing. And he was telling him all about this great song, and when are we going to, that sounds great. We should do that someday. He says, well, how about tonight? In fact, how about like right now? So that's the story Lou Jr. had told me about that. And yeah, so I think that's another one I love. Having a party. What's the one? Might be 1 o'clock, might be much to me. Let the Good Times Roll. I love that one. Because it's that line about it might be 1 o'clock, it might be 3. Time don't mean that much to me. Ain't had this much fun since I don't know when. I might not have this much fun again, just such a great, I just love that. I love that song. There's so many that he wrote.
Sure. Like What a Wonderful World. That's my dad's favorite.
Oh,
Don't know much about history.
which is ironic because he was a great student. He
Uh-huh.
was a book monitor. He was a voracious reader, and his grandnephew told a story that I also told, where he would go into a store and he's on the road, and he wanted reading material. He didn't like to just sit there on a tour bus or in a car. They usually travel by car. And he would just get every magazine in the place. He'd buy pocketbooks. He was always reading. And there's a picture I have in my book of his living room. They were publicity photos for Jet magazine. It wasn't like, this picture of, we can get into this later, but picture of him with his wife Barbara. Yeah, they're just publicity photos. But he's got this framed portrait of the women's suffragette movement on the wall, and I thought, it's 1964. That's very telling that somebody had that on their wall. I just think it says a lot about him and how he felt about social issues. Just very in tune with things that were going on around him and in the country and in the world.
Right. And, I guess and since you brought that up, and I could say when you say the things going on in the world at that time, of course, the civil rights movement and what was going on with Black Americans in this country, he actually became good friends with Jim Brown and Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, which in meeting Malcolm X, I believe, helped to inspire, well, partly in Change Is Gonna Come, but there's a tie. Sam Cooke has several ties to my home state of Louisiana. Oddly, that song was written because of an incident that occurred in Shreveport, where he was denied, he and his family were denied access to it.
Let me correct you on that. That story, which I know who told that story, somebody who claimed to be related to him and still does. I'm not going to go into who it is. But that story is not exactly accurate. And his family, who I got to know very well over these past 18 years, told me the entire story.
Okay.
So I'll even get further to what they told me, because I know the car he was driving. When he was on one of the Ed Sullivan Show appearances, Eddie Fisher was backstage. Eddie Fisher, and I know Eddie Fisher's son, Todd, somewhat, and we've talked. And Eddie Fisher was goofy in many ways. And I've also written a screenplay about Mike Todd, so I know a lot about that whole thing.
This is Carrie Fisher's father.
Well,
dad, right?
Eddie Fisher, yeah. Eddie Fisher Eddie Fisher was backstage with Sam, and they were shooting craps to kill time. And as somebody said to Eddie Fisher later, you don't shoot craps with somebody from Bronzeville because he's going to beat you every time. And he lost $5,000 to Sam Cooke backstage in a short amount of time. And he didn't have $5,000 on him. And Sam said, well, okay, what do you have? He goes, wait, how about the keys to my Maserati? You can have it. I'm sure I'll get another car. He said, and he didn't tell him about the horn problem that the car had. And it had a horn problem. But Sam loved that Maserati, and because he loved sports cars and he liked to drive fast on the open road. And he would take that down south on tours. He had a Cadillac too that they took. But on this one tour, he went, I'm trying to think, Mr. White, guitar player, Cliff White, was riding with him. And so they had issues with the horn going off. And in this motel where they stayed, this hotel, and they're watching TV and they're getting cleaned up and they're, trying to relax, and the horn went off. And the manager of the hotel went over, knocked on the door. And he said, Mr. Cooke, you got to do something about that horn. And he said, the car is off. The ignition's off. I don't know what to do. I'm not a mechanic. And he said, well, you better do something or there's going to be a problem here. He sent some people down to look at it. I said, Sam, we can't figure out what the hell to do with this thing. We think we've got it turned off and then it turns back on. It's like a haunted car. So eventually the manager was just perturbed enough that he called the cops. He said, this group is disturbing the peace. He wasn't there with family. Family was not there. The only family might have been, was Charles, who was his driver. And because after he was in the car accident in 1958 with his valet who was driving 100 miles an hour, and Lou Rawls, who
was in that,
had his head cracked open, basically, almost, actually, according to Lana, he literally died a couple of times and had to be revived. If Sam had not taken Lou to a white hospital, let's just say it like it is, he would not have survived. Not because of the incompetence of Black doctors, because of the lack of resources those hospitals had.
Yeah.
So that
was probably the closest.
Right. And that traumatized Sam so many capacities. He made some ridiculous decisions in his life we can get back to later, but maybe not ridiculous, but things he might not have done otherwise. Let's just say that. His marriage being one. But he took the Maserati, and he loved getting that thing on the open road and everything, but he didn't foresee all these problems. So his road manager always kept a cachet of a lot of cash. And because they knew if you get stopped, you pay them and you get out. And so sure enough, they're in jail, gives the sheriff the money, bail, whatever it was, and they were free to go. But it wasn't like they were precluded from staying in a hotel. Dwayne Eddy told me, he said he never bought the explanation of how Sam died, because he said Sam would never be in a $3 a night flop joint. He said they rolled a red carpet out for Sam, even in the South. And he was on one of those tours. He said they loved Sam. He said the problem was the integration of the audiences, which went against the Jim Crow laws of the time. That's where the issues came in. And that was, the issue with Jesse Belvin's death. It's a whole other thing. But no, it was not about not being able to stay at the hotel. That story was inaccurate.
Okay. Yeah, well, they had given, I know, like a key to the city, the mayor of Shreveport, but I thought that was an interesting story. But damn, I thought the legend would have been, the legend of that story sounded better. But yeah,
I actually called the mayor's office. I wanted to let you know. I called the mayor's office. Sorry, I got to turn my phone off completely here. I called the mayor's office, and I actually spoke to the mayor's deputy about that story, and they thought I was just some crackpot person. I said, you can look up my book. I said, in fact, I'll send you a copy if you want. I know the family. I know the story. She hung up on me twice. I don't know. I mean, it's called Sam Cooke the Truth because that's all I'm trying to tell. And, the family has been cheated out of Sam's presence for over 60 years now.
Sure.
And we're not even going to get into the money that was not there once he died. That's we can move on to that, and but
no, I would like to get into that because I feel what I've noticed, and I've said this before on my live stream, especially when I had a chance to interview Michael Jackson's nephew Taj, and I called Michael Sam Cooke 2.0. And the reason why I said that was because in terms of I think Michael Jackson is the greatest entertainer to ever live, but Michael was doing things on the business side of music that a lot of people didn't like when it came to publishing. And Sam Cooke certainly was doing that with regards to his music publishing companies and record companies and stations he was creating, where he was going to be basically an independent artist, which is what he was trying to do. And unfortunately, it was very short lived. And the story of what happens to him, I know it's in your book, but there have been documentaries about Sam Cooke, and I'm going to talk with you about that. But I want to ask you about the writing process. You have 2 books on Sam Cooke. How did you come to, first off, write about Sam?
You know, it was accidental. But maybe it wasn't. You know, things happen. I'm a very spiritual person. I have a master's in theology. I've always been interested in another realm of things happening. We don't know everything. Life is a mystery. Sure. God is a mystery. The Holy Spirit, all of that. And this is really fascinating. My son was at a football camp at UCLA. I'm wearing because the girls are playing softball in the World Series today. So I was doing recruiting stories for them. And at the same time, my son was at the football camp, and I was just talking with another parent. Turns out this man was in the film industry, and we were talking about writing. And I told him I had studied screenwriting, and he said, well, what's your dream frisbee of a story you'd love to write about? And without even thinking about it, I said, I would like to know what really happened to Sam Cooke. I'd like to know more about his life, but I certainly want to know the real way he died, because that cannot be the truth. And this man, just his eyes wide, was just, you know, he didn't die that way. And he told me, he said the whole, and this is LA now, I was living in LA. He said the whole Black community here knows, and they knew at the time that it didn't happen that way.
Sure.
Well, so the more I started researching it, people seem to come out of the woodwork. I mean, how is it that I'm at a Fat Burger in Victorville, 2 hours outside? I don't even go to Fat Burger. I was with somebody who said, let's go to Fat Burger. All right, And in front of me in line is the woman whose father owned the People's Funeral Home where Sam was lying in state. And we began talking about the funeral, and she was telling me about Johnny Morissette apologizing, throwing himself over Sam, and they thought he was drunk. And I said, no, he wasn't drunk. I said, when I interviewed Johnny Morissette Jr., he told me that Johnny had told his wife, and Johnny's mom had told him the story many times. They put a gun to Johnny's head, told him to get to PJ's that night, that he was at Martoni's. And the stories from people at Martoni's, there are some people that it just pointed to collusion for me, that there are people who were covering up beyond LAPD. There are people that claim to be Sam's friend who covered things up. And, this stuff just kept getting deeper. And I worked with a copyright attorney and others who have helped me. And my buddy said, when you're in this industry, you find out that it was entirely mobbed up. Distribution was where they laundered money. They had box companies. They would K-Tel Records.
It's still mobbed up.
Oh yes, it's still mobbed up. It's just maybe done a little bit differently, but I don't know, because you look at Tupac and Biggie and the LAPD involvement in that. I mean, this stuff just never ends, and it's and look what corporate America is doing to us today. Now they're just brazen about it.
Well, what they do with the royalty, especially when it comes to the royalties of artists, how artists are paid, songwriters are not paid, and basically they pimp out a lot of the kids who are the entertainers who are there. Because I remember reading an article from BBC. The top songwriters in the world are driving Ubers now to make ends meet. So they're holding a lot of the money. You wonder, wait, if you sell a song that sells over, let's say, 2 million copies,
right,
where does the songwriter's royalties come from? Obviously, what are they doing? But I do want to, just so everybody understands, because you mentioned Johnny Morissette. Who Johnny Morissette was, and I showed a picture, I believe that was him. He was an artist on Sam Cooke's label. Is that correct?
He was. kind of a funny story that Johnny Jr. didn't even know about, I don't think, at the time. Sam loved Johnny's voice and his ability to perform. He went to see him. I think he had Caribbean roots. I can't quite remember exactly, but I seem to think that he did. And Sam brought somebody else with him. I don't remember if it was Lou Adler or somebody else in the business that he was working with. I can't say for sure. But they thought he had a lot of talent. And Sam, that was when Sam told the person he was with, and I think this was Lou Adler, he said, turn around and listen to him. He said, you don't judge somebody by what they look like and how they're performing, but listen to how they're singing the song. And he really liked the way Johnny interpreted songs. So Johnny was one of a number of artists that Sam produced. He had SARS and Derby, two labels. SARS was more for gospel, blues, and Derby was for pop. And Tracy Publishing was how he published his own music. This goes back, a lot of people think it happened later. No, right after You Send Me, he opened up his own labels. He realized he had to be responsible for a lot of people in his family. He had kids to support. That's why he crossed over. That was the biggest reason. It wasn't just to be famous. It was for the money. Lloyd Price showed him what he was getting. He crossed over. He said, man, you deserve to get this kind of money and you need it for your family. And that's what he did. So Sam said, I'll be damned if I'm going to let, somebody else, let's just say it like this, some white guy, get my money when I'm the one sweating, and he said buckets of sweat. Somebody, I think it was his girlfriend that told me, he had buckets of sweat when he performed. He worked so hard at performing. And so, yeah, Johnny was one of those people. Johnny Taylor was another one. Billy Preston he didn't exactly discover Billy Preston. I think he had been on the Steve Allen show, but Billy Preston wasn't really doing much. And he was 16 when Sam heard him. And he said, boy, he is good. That he heard Stevie Wonder, and it was kind of a funny comment. And of course, he would never say this about Stevie today. But as a child, he said, that boy sure can play the harp. He said, but I don't know about his voice. Because Sam was very picky about voices.
Right. Well, Berry Gordy was about to fire Stevie Wonder after Fingertips because his voice was changing. And so that's interesting. You said that. And
yeah,
when he came up, I think it was Uptight. That's when, and that was a hit. They didn't have any problems after that.
Right.
They went straight.
Stevie Wonder's amazing. He's always one of my favorite singers for sure. I still love Fingertips to this day. Another car radio song you hear, and oh yeah. And Smokey plays that on his channel, which I listen to all the time. Right. But yeah, he was another one. Let's see, the Sims Twins. Mel Carter was one of his later discoveries. And in my book, I'll just say this because it's such a cute story that Mel told me when I had interviewed him. He said they got finished with a session, and he said, man, Sam worked me so hard. He goes, I was just exhausted. And he says, Mel Carter, you got yourself a pretty voice. And then he said, he kind of elbowed him. He says, but Sam Cooke. He just said that to be funny. That was Sam's sense of humor. And Mel just fell out laughing. And he said, because I knew Sam was, just being silly. But he told him, he said, if you really want to make the big money, this is Mel's story. Now, I have a different take on this. But what he said was, and what he's told other people in interviews, is that Sam said he couldn't pay him much money and he would do well to go to a bigger label. Well, that may be true. But the thing that I find interesting is that he said he wanted to work with Zelda. Zelda Sands, her professional name, Zelda Samuel's her real name. She says a lot of things about Klein, airs a lot of suspicions about him. Of course, she knew when he was alive he wasn't going to do anything to her because she knew things, and she wasn't talking about everything she really knew. Mm-hmm. She just wanted to look like she was agreeing with people. But then she went to work for Alan Klein when he went over to Liberty Distribution. So she was not forthcoming with that. That's something I found out in something else I read about Liberty and who worked there. And it was a big 2-volume compendium of Liberty records.
So she worked directly under Alan Klein?
She did.
Wow. So Zelda was Sam's secretary at his...
Well, she'll tell you she would. she was a interesting person. Very, very zippy, I guess, is lack of a better term. She was very forthright, and Sam liked that about her. She was a bit of a pit bull. She helped with bookings. She was an administrative assistant, as she put it, but she was a labels. J.W. Alexander was his labels partner. She was the labels manager, as she put it. She ran the label.
Right. Now, I want to ask you this. So you mentioned some people you interviewed, soul artists. It sounds like you talked to my fellow New Orleans native, Lloyd Price, who was born in Kenner.
I love Lloyd.
Mr. Personality. I want to ask you, how did you, just to meet these people, that had to have taken a long process?
Well, this is another thing. Lloyd was appearing in Vegas. This is also how I met the relative of the fire captain who had been at the scene when Sam died. Same rock and roll review. And, here I thought I had turned my phone off, and this spam callers are, I swear. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that.
It's all right.
I'm trying to turn this whole thing off. Let me do this here. So Lloyd was appearing, and I was with my friend, my attorney friend that I mentioned, and I said, let's see if we can go backstage and talk to Lloyd for a bit. But before that, after that, I think it was right after that, we met him through my friend Bill Gardner, KPFK. Rhapsody in Black was a great show on Saturday afternoons. And Bill has had some health issues, and so he's got some people covering for him right now. He still shows up every so often, but Bill is a dear friend of mine, and actually worked with me on a song list for a another movie in the 50s about a sports team. And so Lloyd was there. My friend had a gold record for Lloyd that he had done. He did gold records for people that had, like Fats Domino had lost some of his gold records, and Katrina. So he did one for him. So we met Lloyd, had a great talk with Lloyd. I have pictures with him. And then, but the greatest thing was at that concert in Vegas, my friends, Roy Hamilton Jr. and his wife, Maria, good friends of mine, were there. And Maria said, can you introduce us to Lloyd? I said, oh, sure. And Lloyd came out, and he started singing You'll Never Walk Alone when he saw them. He's so funny. He's such a funny guy. and that just not only meant the world to them, meant the world to me. I was so happy to be able to introduce Roy Hamilton's son and daughter-in-law to Lloyd. And Lloyd, whenever he saw me, he'd yell, BG, he was Mr. Personality, he really was. He told me some really interesting stories about Sam's first marriage, because it was a woman that he knew. He didn't mention he was married at the time, but apparently he needed to kind of, without breaking up with this woman totally, kind of like get her interested in other people. And just, I guess she was a performer also, and she suggested she go see Sam. And Sam just married this woman, Dolores Mohawk. And the family was just stunned. He said, well, wait a minute. You have this other girl, Dorothy, you're saying, what? We love Dorothy. She's your girl. It's like,
right.
I know, but Dorothy has her life and blah, blah, blah. And it turned out that his first marriage didn't work at all, because Sam was always on the road, and she was clingy and wanted somebody, came home 9 to 5. She had a son from a previous marriage. And Sam was great with the boy. They were close. even after she passed, they were very, very close.
She
And
would send money to him, I believe.
yeah. Oh,
He actually paid for the funeral.
Yeah. And even after Sam died, his parents continued to do what they could. Barbara cut them out of insurance money and all kinds of other things, but that's another story. So, but yeah, Lloyd was just great. It was wonderful to meet him, and he just loved Sam. He said Sam Cooke can sing the fish out of the water. And that was a great line.
Yeah, and New Orleans has a very interesting, has a lot of ties with this because, of course, my hometown, New Orleans, is the home of jazz and the blues. It's a music town. So, in fact, Little Richard recorded Tutti Frutti right here for Specialty Records the first time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sam had recorded here a couple of times. He also performed at the Dewdrop Inn, which was a big place for a lot of stars at that time, black stars at that time. But so how long did it take you to write these books?
Oh, gosh. Well, it took me, I got the idea in 2007 at this camp in the summer. My son was in his senior year of high school, and I decided when he graduated, I was really going to focus on gathering enough information. It started out, I was just going to do a screenplay.
Yeah.
And it turned into, oh my God, it could have been a mini series. By the time I was done researching, my friend told me, he said, "You've got a book here. This isn't just a screenplay. You've got a 300-page book." And so that's what I did. I just decided to take my information and I kept going. I've always said this investigation was very fluid. I had to go into Los Angeles, downtown LA, to the courthouse annex. I found files on Alan Klein and Sam Cooke. I Xeroxed everything I could get my hands on. I got the full autopsy report from the coroner's office. It's a funny story how I managed to get the death certificate, but a little bit of chicanery on my part, I guess. But I somehow convinced a clerk I was related to Sam. I know that's really wrong, but I needed to have that. I needed
Don't
to
say too much on the internet.
I couldn't believe he believed it, but he looked at me kind of funny. Well, okay, so your relative, because that's the only way you really get a marriage, death, or birth certificate. So
you're the relative or you're the attorney.
Right. Well, I figured I'm acting on behalf of his relatives, and I wrote this book. And I have to tell you that his family has just been so supportive and so wonderful. And his colleagues, people I ran into, and and somebody would say, "Oh, you've got to talk to this guy." Like Stan Ross said, "You got to talk to Hal Blaine," because my friend knew Stan Ross, and so I talked to Stan quite a bit. And Stan Ross, Gold Star Records, he was the co-founder with Dave Gold.
And you said he's the last one that actually saw Sam.
I was just going there. 10:30 at night, he said, I was at United Recorders across the street. I had to grab a bite to eat for the drive home to his wife, Vera. And he said, I'll just stop in. And he said, it's pretty dead at that time. Martoni's was a hot spot at happy hour time. But by 10 o'clock at night, the place is pretty well emptied out. And he said, I walk in and he said, I cannot believe sitting alone at the bar is Sam Cooke. And he said, now he did in those days when you were on Shindig, people think it was a live recording. The sound was mixed at Gold Star. And after they mixed the sound, then they put it together with the video. And so he introduced himself to Sam and told him, we did the sound mixing. He said, oh, yeah, of course I know who you are, And they sat down and talked business for over 2 hours until Stan realized what time it was. And he said, I had to go home to my wife. And he said, if I had to do it all over again, I would have urged Sam to do the same. because apparently, I mean, he was still there when Stan left. He said, and I said, well, what about this woman who went by the name of Elisa Boyer, but
Right.
that was not her real name. It was Crystal Chen Young, but she also had about 10 different aliases.
She was a prostitute.
Prostitute, arrested for prostitution, arrested for attempted murder of somebody she referred to as her boyfriend, who was probably a John. She also worked for LAPD, and turns out
she knew the lady at the hotel.
Well, knew the lady at the hotel, who may have been a madam at times.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a seedy $3 a night flop joint. That's what you're going to expect for a place a prostitute would go. And the other thing is that she also was known by everybody at RCA. So if you read the book, I think Rick Springfield has written about this. We were really trying very hard to interview him. I guess he's not been in good health of late, but Rick Springfield has told people very high in the industry, and I'm not going to mention those people.
And who's Rick? Just so everybody knows.
Springfield did Jesse's Girl in the 80s, pop song, not R&B at all. Just a
sure.
Jesse's Girl was just one of those kind of white bread.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
Jesse's Girl.
That's the one. That's the one.
Yeah.
The talented guy, but he was player with a capital P. Let's put it that way. He tells a story that on Monday in the industry, it was pay to play day. The DJs not only got paid in money to play your song, they got paid to not play some other guy's song. The A&R guys, payola. Well, the A&R guys had to get paid too. So the guys who made sure that the enforcers of all this. So how did they get paid? Through coke and through sex, backseat of limos. And that was where Elisa Boyer made some of her living. So there's no disputing this. It's people have stepped forward that's how Sam knew who she was. The night that he was at Martoni's, and you know, I caught Al Schmidt, the record producer, who's a nice guy, and Al Schmidt and Stan Ross knew each other. And I know Stan's son, and Bradley, and they're doing some great stuff with his partner Jonathan on Gold Star, really letting people know what, things that went on there. And oh my God, I mean, I know stories of people that didn't pay and all this. I'm not going to tell you here, but anyway, it's such a fact. Researching Sam was one of the most interesting things in my life, because it wasn't just about Sam Cooke. It's pulling a thread to the whole industry. There's so much connectivity. What happened to him happened to other people.
Sure.
The people that wanted to, not allow him to be an independent record producer, and to use the fact that it's 1964 and he's a black man, and you're just not going to be able to do this. You're cutting into what we're doing here. You're not going to produce other young black talent. That's our role.
Correct.
And the guys who were trying to talk sense into this, to talk sense, of course it's not talking sense, but that's how they would frame it. We're trying to tell him, hey, you got to go along. And he wasn't having that. He said, I'm not anybody's boy. I've got a family, and I am working like 350 days out of 365 to put food on the table for my family, and to take care of a lot of people here and people who work for me. And I am not going to be working for someone else and have them tell me how to live my life. He just wasn't going to do that. I mean, he went into the business because he didn't want a 9-to-5 job. He had decided that as a 9-year-old. So I'm not going to work for someone else. And, being a songwriter gave him monetary freedom and more of a leg up monetarily, because the songwriter was where that's where the money came in, the publishing. Well, the publishing is also where the deepest degree of mob involvement was. And just think back to when all of this started at the turn of the last century, it was the jukeboxes. That's how they made their money. There's stories of how they would move, one guy would move a jukebox into a nightclub, and all the nightclubs were owned by mobsters.
Right.
And in the jukebox was serviced by other mob companies. And the beer was distributed. And I know this because my uncle was a beer distributor in Chicago. And my cousin, not his kids, but another cousin told me, he says, well, how do you think he got that license? You know, I mean, so there's this connectivity to all of it. And so one guy would move a jukebox in and move the other guy's jukebox out. And that's, you know, all this territorial war. My dad worked on the south side of Chicago for a time in between Philadelphia and Milwaukee. And a guy came in with a picture. He says, you know this guy? He says, I don't know this guy. Oh, yeah, that's Tony. He says, I know Tony. And he put a gun to my dad's head and said, you don't know this guy. And my dad just said, what guy? Because if you went against the mob in any form or fashion, you would not live to tell about it. I know that Sam knew that there were mobsters in the business. Mm-hmm. I don't think he saw the danger that he was in until it was too late. And he found out shortly before his death that his titles of operation had been taken to Reno. The names changed. He no longer owned his own company. Alan Klein, his attorney, his wife. What the hell is his wife doing on Sam's ownership? Why were all these people suddenly owning Sam?
Right. And we're talking about the Tracy Limited with the board of directors. Right. I'm gonna let you finish your sentence, but because we were going to get into his death in a second. But finish what you were about to say.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. I guess I went a little bit ahead.
No problem.
So I mean about the connectivity, and the other thing, Sam always had Papa Cooke, as his father was known in the family, on his legal documents, so that if anything happened to him, he wanted his father to have a voting interest in anything that went forward with money. And he was completely obliterated. Just like, well, okay, I'll stop there. There's more.
Okay, yeah.
So hard to stop.
Well, hold that thought when you say just like.
Yeah, sure.
It's funny when you mention this stuff. I just want to point out, very interesting. James Brown's son, Darryl Brown, did an interview where he even talked about, I mentioned Otis Redding, but he said Otis and James were getting ready to start their own record label, their own publishing company, and Otis, supposedly dies in the plane accident with the rest of the Barkeys in December of 1967, and actually around the anniversary of Sam's passing. So that's very interesting. I pointed that out. And
it is, yeah.
James, even with James Brown's circumstance, and I know he even stated that he believed his father, there was some foul play the way that his father had passed. But that's another story. But what you mentioned about the mob, and especially when you're talking about the industry, is very tying. So I want to just tie in this. There were two documentaries that came out respectively, one in 2019 and one in 2021, called Lady You Shot Me and The Two Killings of Sam Cooke on Netflix. And I saw you roll your eyes. So I guess I got the answer to my question. I was going to ask, did you get contacted by any of the producers to be there?
Let me tell you something. Both of them. Okay, let's talk about the so-called Lady You Shot, which Sam never said Lady You Shot Me. Right. I have spoken, not only my own doctor, my own cardiologist told me it is physically impossible for anybody to utter a word when a bullet has shattered your heart, as is in the autopsy. The bullet went on a diagonal through both lungs and into the heart. You cannot speak. If you unplugged your lamp, this is how my personal physician explained. He said, if you unplug your lamp, does the light stay on or does it go off? Well, of course it goes off. because there's no connectivity. It would have been impossible for him to say that. Secondly, she didn't shoot him.
Right.
She told Sam's father at the inquest. He asked her, and the family has told me this, why did you shoot my son? And she said, I didn't shoot your son.
Sure. And I saw that in the book, but
it's a story that's been perpetuated. So let me get into the other thing. So Gene Jameson, Sam's nephew, who wrote the forward in Sam Cooke, The Truth, and worked with me on all the books. And in fact, one of the reasons I did subsequent editions is he found some things that he thought, well, that's not totally, about the there were family things that I might have used the wrong name or something. So I had to correct those things going forward. And I'm always open to correction. And I always said this was a fluid investigation. And that's why I've done subsequent copies. I think in my last venture, the audiobook of Sam Cooke, The Truth, we've really come to the cul-de-sac where we realized that this was collusion on a lot of fronts. The guys who did the two lady who shot me were from Germany. They approached me, lied to me, and told me they were doing an educational film for German television. I had just finished watching Generation War, which was a document, well, not a documentary, it was a feature film from the German point of view on World War II about the youth that got drafted and didn't want to go. And I was fascinated by that. And we had a great conversation. And turned out it was all for profit. None of this was educational. They were supposed to interview Johnny Morissette Jr., and they left them stranded outside the hotel room where they were filming. His wife had just bought a new dress for the interview, would not interview him. They did not interview Lou Rawls Jr., same thing, sitting there waiting for them to come over. Why didn't they talk to certain people? Because they had a narrative they were filling. Why were they doing this? Because with the exception of Crossing Over, which was done for PBS, where they interviewed the family, like Sam's sister Agnes, everybody else has acquiesced to Abco and to Klein. And the only way they can use the music is to not mention anything about Alan Klein, to not make him the villain, to just, completely omit any mention of him or of Abco in anything they've done, and to not really get into the murder. Alan Klein himself, when he took over Cameo Parkway, he shelved all the music. When he took over Sam's recordings, Sam Cooke songs were not being played. Sam Cooke music has only been on the radio and Sirius Satellite, I'd say, for the last maybe 8 to 10 years. And I'd like to think that I'm not a narcissist of any kind, but I'd like to think that my book had something to do with it, and other projects have had something to do with this. Now, The Two Killings of Sam Cooke was a complete ripoff of my book, because they came to my ex's house wanting to ask questions, and to a guy, I'll just say his name is Leo. He, not the Pope, but he is not Pope Leo, another Leo. And Leo worked for the American Music Awards in security. He got a fascinating story. He was a messenger boy for Carlos Marcello in New Orleans. You talk about a New Orleans story. Yeah. He was, as a kid, he was a messenger boy. And he lived next door to Fats Domino, who I got to go to Fats's house and interview him about Sam too. So yeah, New Orleans is amazing. And Frog Man Henry. Yeah. So they not only went to they went through my book, and they went through all my sources and contacted all my sources and came up with a story to fit the narrative that they had. Oh, we really don't know. Oh, it's a mystery. Well, there is no mystery. Nobody dies. First of all, let's just get to the most preposterous thing about this. In the photo of Sam Cooke,
before we do that,
go ahead.
Let me direct. Before we do that, we got to give everybody, especially who doesn't know the official story, what is the official story of Sam Cooke's death. What is the story the Los Angeles Police Department gives them? So
Okay.
the story supposedly is that Sam was at Maratoni's with Al Schmidt and his wife having dinner. He flashed or had like $5,000 worth of cash on him. And while he's eating dinner, he gets up to say hello to some people. And then they see what Al Schmidt described was an Oriental girl. I know they don't use that term anymore, but this was Lisa Boyer.
Yeah.
And supposedly afterwards, the Schmidts leave to go home, and they are supposedly the last ones to see Sam alone, correct?
That's what they say. That's what they say.
But from your research, I know you say otherwise. But before we get to that part, this is like a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah,
so
sure.
We get Sam gets in a Ferrari, his Ferrari, and goes across town to the Hacienda Hotel, where he books and signs a room in his name, and supposedly with Lisa Boyer. And I can't say I can't use the words SA or well, I can't say that, but let's just say where he supposedly tries to force himself on Lisa Boyer, and he goes into the bathroom. He leaves while he's in the bathroom. She picks up his clothes, and I believe takes everything except Sam has a suit and some shoes, and takes his clothes with I'm assuming his money inside there, with his car keys. Did she take the car? I'm not sure, or how the car was still there.
No, the car was running.
So the car was running.
That tells you right away. He didn't go into a room with her.
So the car is running.
The car was running. I had a witness, Vincent Graves, and we just lost Vincent 2 years ago. And it's really sad. So many people I've interviewed for this book have passed on. But Vincent's father and mother were friends of Sam Cooke, and his dad and mom, when they heard the news, went over to the hacienda. They were just they didn't know what else to do. They were driving around. They heard this on the car radio. And I think they had been at a nightclub or something, and they'd been out. I don't know, but they didn't live far from there. They lived in South LA. And they said the strangest thing is that his car was running. And why the door was open. That was really, really odd. And that has also been quoted in other quarters too. I have read that in some other publications as well. But I heard that from somebody who was directly there. Now, let's talk about
that the car was still running.
His car was still running, which is not in the police report. You know,
so the car.
A lot of stuff is not in there.
Sure.
I will just tell you that I spoke with a detective a number of years ago who admitted that this was never fully investigated. I said, "You think? No chalk lines, no yellow tape, no fingerprints, nothing preserved, you know?" And he said, "Well, there were notes." I said, "Well, where are those notes?" He said, "Well, they somehow got lost when the building moved, because they moved out of," this is really telling, Police Chief William H. Parker had the building named for him. In subsequent years, as all the crap this guy did came to light, they took his name off the police building altogether. It's not named for him. And they want to disassociate themselves with the things he did. William Parker had been acquiescent with the mob since the days of Mickey Cohen. So when you hear an official report of a suicide that isn't, and we can get into that later on. Let me get into Sam first. So let's go to Martoni's. Let's start with Martoni's.
Well, wait, we got to finish the official story. So
let's correct that.
So she leaves, she takes the money. Supposedly she does call 911. That was featured in a documentary. She called on a payphone. Sam gets out of the motel, doesn't see her, goes to the manager's office. Bertha Franklin is on the phone with the owner of the motel. He bangs on the door asking if you've seen her, and she says no, and then he breaks down the door, to which point a struggle ensues. She grabs a gun, I believe it was a .22 caliber, and fired I believe it was 2 or 3 shots. One shot hit Sam under the armpit, piercing his lung and heart. She then subsequently in the struggle grabs a broomstick, hits him on top of the head, and he utters the infamous words, "Lady, you shot me," and then passes out the guys. Now, I want to show everybody a couple of things why I've always called BS on that story, and a lot of people don't believe it, is when you look at Bertha Franklin, and I'm going to pull up some pictures from this incident. Now, this photograph, and maybe you can help me, this is the photograph that is taken at the Haciend Motel, I believe, and you can correct me if it wasn't, but this is her, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, supposedly, I'm looking at this. I'm just curious. How does someone now? Looks like there's blood on a dress or so forth. I'm not sure. It's a black and white photograph, but I've never seen someone pose after they've shot someone and smile.
Because she didn't shoot him. She said that. Family stands by that. First of all, 59-year-old woman, she did not own, Sam was killed with a .22. That is the one thing that is in the autopsy that is very, very interesting. She did not own a .22. She owned a .38. That's the gun that was licensed to her.
Right.
She claimed that the gun was on top of her bureau and they were on the wrestling on the floor. Oh, she just jumped up, grabbed the gun, and somehow shot him. It would have to have been on this side. It's preposterous. It's physically impossible for that to have happened. Secondly, what man, your man, what man in his right mind, even somebody on PCP would, I mean, I think Richard Pryor, when he was on fire, would not run down the street in only a jacket. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember that story. And I met Richard Pryor. And
Richard, well, he was freebasing cocaine. And
when he was freebasing.
Yeah, liquor and stored some substance on and lit himself.
Yeah, but he was on fire. But I'm saying, if you were running out of a room, if you were in a hurry to go anywhere, the first thing a man would put on would be shorts, pants. You would not worry about a suit jacket. Why would you put a suit jacket on? He was found with one shoe. Now that's actually very meaningful. A sport jacket and one shoe is a signal that this was a mob hit. Do not investigate. And the reason, the meaning behind it is that when a man is put into a casket, he is not necessarily covered from the bottom down, from the mid, let's just say from mid waist down. You were seeing the man dressed well, from his neck to his stomach, and that's it. That's all you're seeing. You generally don't see the full body on display. Sometimes you do, but very often in a casket you don't. Okay. And that was very telling. Now let's talk about the Martonis thing.
Okay.
This Boyer, Lisa Chen Young, Crystal Chen Young, all the different aliases. Because she also had by the way, an LLC called Young and Lovely, registered in Santa Monica, California. That was since scrubbed from the internet after that was in my book. She had an escort service. Okay, so she did all kinds of shady things. And as I mentioned, she worked for RCA and she worked for LAPD. She did a lot of shady things. Sure. So how did she get to Martoni's? If Sam arrived alone, how did she get there? You know how she got there? She walked in with Pete Bennett. Pete Bennett, whose real name was Pietro Benedetto, was Alan Klein's partner. He was his conduit to Morris Levy, as was, let me just say, Klein and Morris Levy knew each other going back to days. Morris Levy was a Roulette Records, notorious, mobbed up with the Genovese family.
Sure.
actually accused of killing people, was on trial for murder and extortion when he died of cancer, allegedly. Well, some people didn't believe it actually happened when it did. And Levy answered to the Genovese family and sometimes Giancana. All of these managers were mob connected in some way, and they all managed to infiltrate the inner circle. And I'll get to that in a bit. But so she's there with Pete Bennett at Martoni's. And how did she then get to PJ's? Because she didn't go with Sam.
Right.
Sam was at the bar and Stan Ross was there. So that contradicts. And Al Schmidt, when he heard about that story, became very upset. Well, I didn't see Stan there. I said, what time did you leave? 10:30. I said, well, in all the books that have been written, it says 10. So, okay, I guess it was 10. All right, well, Stan arrived at 10:30. And he knows exactly when he arrived because he knows when he left United Recorders. And he said Sam was alone at the bar. And he said the girl was not there. When I asked him specifically, did you see Sam with it? No, Sam was alone at the bar. And I was so amazed to see him there. So that contradicts that. Right. The other thing is that the idea, the notion that somebody of Sam Cooke's stature, now we're talking about somebody with 29 United States top 40 hits, 57 if you're including international hits, 19 R&B top 10 hits, 4 top 10 pop hits. Somebody who just played at the Copa, somebody who was on his way to playing Vegas, a rising star, a big deal. Was gaining a white audience as much as a black one. Everybody loved Sam Cooke, was on and talked about the things he wanted to do. And this may have been a tip-off when he was on Dick Clark's Bandstand, said that he wanted to come off the road, produce other people. That was a very telling interview. So that's all the truth of it. She didn't shoot him. That never happened. He was set up. This Boyer Chen, whatever you want to call her, she was like a human tracking device to follow his whereabouts that night. And was Barbara involved to some extent? Unfortunately, she knew what was going down. Now, they didn't necessarily know he was going to be murdered.
Sure. Now, I want you to hold that thought because I want to get to Barbara in a minute, because there's a sad story, I believe, in your book that I had on Barbara. I've read both of your books, and initially in your first book, you had stated or hinted that it didn't look like Barbara had anything to do with his passing. But then when I read the second book, you got in more detail, especially as it relates to the passing of their son, Vincent, and what were the circumstances behind Vincent's drowning, because Tracy, who is Sam's daughter, I believe, spoke with you and told you about that. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but I do want to share everybody, because you mentioned Morris Levy. Now, if you go to the Wikipedia page we have here, they have now Wikipedia may not be always the most accurate, but this is true. So
no, this part is true. Yeah.
So Morris Levy, they described him as an American entrepreneur, wink, wink, in the field of jazz clubs, music publishing, and independent record industry. He was the co-founder of Rhule Records. Now, how I knew about Morris Levy, there was a movie back in the 90s called Why Do Fools Fall in Love?
Right.
Which starred Vivica Fox, Layla Rashawn, Holly Berry, and Lorenz Tate. And Lorenz Tate played Frankie Lyman, who was with Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. Right. And they had the hit song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And Morris Levy was the record owner. And he put his name on that album, on that record, I should say. But Morris Levy never wrote not one note or one lyric to that song. And what they describe here in Wikipedia, they said Billboard magazine called him, quote, one of the record industry's most controversial and flamboyant players. And his nickname, according to Variety, was the Octopus, because he had far-reaching control disproportionate to the size of his companies in every area of the record business. AllMusic described him as, quote, a notorious crook who swindled artists out of their owed royalties. Levy falsely took writing credit in order to receive royalties, enriching himself at the expense of many of his signed artists, especially black R&B artists, because a lot of these artists, ladies and gentlemen, and BG, you know this, when they started off in the industry, of course, they were teenagers, they were kids, they didn't know any better in the business side of it. And Sam Cooke, I would say the exceptions at that time would be Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, James Brown, to an extent, Otis Redding. They understood the business side of the music industry. Now, so Morris Levy, you mentioned, was the mentor of Alan Klein. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna get into Alan Klein, and Alan Klein, of course, was Sam Cooke's manager, but at one point he was actually an accountant.
He wasn't an accountant.
Oh, he wasn't?
They wouldn't give him a license in the state of New York because he was so mobbed up.
Oh, well, yeah. The documentary described him as he was an accountant, but he was at one time what he was famous for was managing the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And he did it at the same time, but according to what I've read, even Paul McCartney even stated Klein was part of the reason why the Beatles broke up. It wasn't just Yoko Ono or anything like that, but there was money and disputes. The Rolling Stones don't even own the rights to their earlier works. APCO, as you know, has that, which is why Mick Jagger, from what I heard, Mick Jagger and can't stand Alan Klein, from what I've heard. But yes, so we were talking about Sam, and you mentioned his wife, Barbara. Now, you mentioned in your book, Barbara was an extravagant spender at the time, when she met Sam, and they would, of course, they had 3 children, I believe, Linda, Tracy, and Vincent. And sadly, Vincent passed in 1963. He was drowning. But Tracy told you, I guess, the circumstances behind that?
Yeah, and, we're going through sort of a thing with the family that there are those who are not sure Tracy is Tracy. She lived there. She may have been the valet's daughter. And it's a very convoluted story. You take people at face value and what they say. You have no reason to disbelieve them unless you find out otherwise. And her story was so detailed. And I thought, I was mentioning one of the Cooke relatives, how could this not have been her? She said, well, it could have been, it obviously was somebody who lived there and saw this, but Tracy, apparently Tracy, the real Tracy, according to them, has been was in a hospital for quite some time under palliative care. She had some sort of brain injury from having fallen in a pool before Vincent ever did. So this was not the first time one of her children had fallen in the pool, apparently. Sam had put up a gate and had hired people to watch Barbara because she was very inattentive when it came to watching the kids. Here's the thing. They were living separately. At the end of Sam's life, he had an apartment on Santa Barbara Avenue, which is now MLK. And she was living down the street from the hacienda, which is why they did not know this. But at the time of the repast, when Sam died, she kept asking everybody, did anybody say they saw my car? Did anybody say they saw my car? And they thought, is she medicated or something? They thought maybe her doctor had given her something to calm her down. She was like out of her mind. They didn't know what she was talking about. And then later on, they started to, what about her car? She also owned a 22. Now, I'm not suggesting she killed Sam. She did not. Could somebody have used her gun? That's possible. I'm not discounting it, but here's the thing I know. Their marriage was irretrievably broken. For their marriage was an agreement. This was not this big love affair. What you saw in Jet magazine was a series of publicity photos. Sam would put that out there because he knew that that would sell an image that he wanted to project of himself. He wasn't stupid. He met a woman named Dorothy Holloway when he was on the road with the Soulsters back in, I think it was 1950. I have many pictures, of her with the family. Family said she was his girl. They were engaged at one point. They just were like star-crossed lovers. That's what I refer to them in the book as. It went back and forth. She married someone else. He would tear up pictures of Sam. He married, Dolores. That didn't work out. And at the end of his life, she was at the Cooke home, at Papa Cooke's house, and she said to me, we were sitting under a tree, and he said, I'm going to ask you to marry me one last time, and you're not going to say no this time. And she said, I didn't say no. And so they had plans in 1965. He was going to divorce Barbara after the holidays. He didn't want to do it before then. And so Barbara sent out Christmas gifts in October, and the family said, well, isn't this strange? Who sends out Christmas gifts 3 months ahead of time?
Mm-hmm.
And they asked Barbara about it, and this is in Eric Green's book, Our Cousin Sam, which is Our Cousin Sam. I keep saying that wrong. Our Uncle Sam, which is a very good book to read. It really tells you a lot about his relationship with his family, very tight-knit family, wonderful family stories. And the family all sat together in a living room and shared things with Vincent, God, what is wrong with me? And shared things with Eric about this. And she said, sometimes things don't turn out the way you think they're going to. Well, here's the thing about Barbara, and I want to save some of this because I'm working on a doc industry as well. And there's some things that one of the close relatives has said about Barbara that I'm not going to mention here. But what I will say is that after Sam's car accident with Lou Rawls, he married her within a matter of a couple of months. I don't think he was over the trauma. I don't think he really thought this through, except the one thing he was sure of, he wanted to be there for his kids. The other mothers of his children lived in Ohio and Pennsylvania, had moved on, remarried, had boyfriends. And so the only person who gave him access was Barbara. And that was to Linda, his oldest daughter. And he was very close with Linda and talked to her. She said, he always talked to me like I was a young adult. She loved that about him. He was very much about education. He wanted to put her through UCLA. And just decided that he needed to have a home base, and his reputation needed bolstering and all of this if he was going to move forward in his life. So maybe some of it was thought through, but he married Barbara, and I think she always expected maybe, she always knew he'd come back for me. Well, he didn't necessarily come back for you. He came back for Linda. And she perpetuated a myth. In my current book, there's a picture of where she lived, and it was behind iron gates that was on property that was co-jointly owned by the U.S. government and mobsters who owned racehorses. So go figure.
This was before Sam. This was
just okay. A couple of years ago.
Now she passed away, I think, a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And this picture was taken right before that last book came out. So.
And just FYI, you mentioned, I did want to ask you this, and I'm going to get back on track, but one of Sam's girlfriends, I believe, she went to Dillard University, you mentioned in the book, went to school here in New Orleans. He has a daughter, and they had a child here.
That was Sharon's mother. And And yeah, they went together for a year. This was in between things with
Vernon
Dorothy.
Nelson, yeah.
Yes. And um, she loved Sam. Sam loved her. I mean, it wasn't like a just a thing. He did have a daughter, which now they say that they're not sure that's even been proven with DNA. But there was somebody that had said she was his daughter. So we don't know. I mean, it's a lot of conjecture with some people, but the DNA generally disproves that most of these are his kids. But she definitely was, and she brought Sharon backstage when she was a baby to meet her daddy. And the first thing Sam said when he saw her was, "Oh, she's got my nose. She's got the Cooke nose," you know. So he always knew Sharon was his daughter. And you know, it's a very painful thing for some of his children to have not been recognized. I blame Barbara for that, because she selfishly said Sam didn't love these women, these girls. He only loved her daughter, you know. And Barbara, I actually, this is another thing. I was doing a book signing in LA, and I met two women who went to high school with Barbara. And they said she had been hit in the head and she had a plate in her head. And they said sometimes she said things that were just completely off the wall. And that would have been one of them, that she and ABCO sent attorneys, went to great lengths to keep those women and their children from getting a penny of Sam's money beyond, I think, a lump sum $9,000. Imagine that.
And his catalog is worth millions.
Oh, a change is going to come
Billions.
alone is a $500 million profit.
Right.
Song. So, I mean, they didn't ask to be rich. They don't care about the money. They told me, and I know Paula, Sharon, you know, it was about being treated as though they were second-class citizens, as though they weren't Sam's progeny, as though he didn't love them, because he did. He loved all his kids. And he sent his parents around to make sure that they felt like they were part of the family, that they were supported financially. And when Sam died, like I said, Barbara sought to cut everybody off. And it was mean and it was cruel. There's just no getting around that.
And just to tie up a loose end, so the son Vincent drowns. We know that from what I read in your book, what Tracy supposedly said was that the housekeeper was there, as well as Barbara and Bobby Womack. If I'm not,
she knows that Barbara was behind the door talking to somebody for bedroom door, and Barbara had always said, "Do not disturb me when I'm with somebody or on the phone. And if you have to, then you knock, but you don't open the door under any circumstances." Well, this story about the housekeeper apparently has veracity. And they did have a housekeeper, and she was not a nice lady. And she couldn't Vincent was a very willful child. That's been written about elsewhere. And didn't always listen. He's a little boy, you know.
2 years old. Yeah, he's a baby.
Little boys. Yeah, I two little boys, you know. One would just, oh, okay, and just do whatever he was going to do, you know. You had to say no, you know, you were told you can't do this. So she, apparently she threw this toy ducky or whatever into the pool and came back into the house and said, "You're going to eat your breakfast." And she turned around to wash a dish or do something, and he took off. He says, "I was going to get that duck no matter what." And it was in the pool, and he is 18 months old. He's not thinking to himself, "I'm in the deep end." I'm sure he'd been in that pool with his parents, but with a life vest on or being held, you know. He didn't know the danger. And why was the gate open? Why did she not check to see that the gate was locked? You're home with your children. You have a pool. That should be the first thing you look at first thing in the morning. And I know it sounds terrible to say that because things happen, accidents happen, children drown. It's the number one killer of children, frankly. And it's very sad. Nowadays we teach 18-month. My kids were swimming at a year. But there was no campaign about that back then. I know I had swimming lessons as a kid, but not everybody's kids did. Not everybody had access to that. We had a good park system. So she should have done that. He told his father that he forgave her, but he couldn't get over it.
Sure.
And they say he was never quite the same. He never got over it. He was incredibly blue. And there was an episode, and it's been documented, that there was a screaming match. Sam was not a screamer by nature. He didn't get mad. He had a temper like anyone else, but he let her have it on a couple of occasions.
Sure.
And he just did not want to live like that. He didn't want the other two growing up in that environment.
Right.
And he told her he's leaving. They're splitting up.
And what's interesting at Sam's funeral, she came there, which upset the family, with Bobby Womack, who was wearing. Now, Bobby Womack was a soul singer who was Sam's protege, and he was wearing Sam's jewelry, his clothes, and eventually he married Barbara not too long after the funeral.
Yeah.
And supposedly Sam Cooke's brother Charles and his other siblings rolled up on Bobby and beat him up.
The Roberts Motel. Yeah.
Right. And then Barbara, actually, there was an incident where she caught Bobby with Linda. And she actually shot at Bobby, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. He, I think, was attempting to molest her. And Barbara, as any mother would, went berserk and tried shooting him. Great way to react. I mean, nowadays you would just get rid of him and get him to jail, but
not necessarily.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily there either. But she just reacted. I just think I can't. Yeah, I can't blame her for flipping out. If I had a daughter and was in that situation, I would, or son, I would feel similarly. Yeah.
But the epilogue to that is Linda ended up marrying Bobby's brother Cecil.
Well, it's an interesting story.
Yeah.
Which is, again, more connectivity. Mary Wells and Curtis Womack were madly in love and going to get married. But Curtis had gotten a girl pregnant. And their father, a minister, said, you've got to do right by this girl and you've got to marry her. And you cannot be with Mary anymore. And Curtis was heartbroken to tell Mary this news. And Mary just loved Curtis. And I guess Cecil saw this as an opportunity to kind of pounce. And according to people who I interviewed, because I wrote a screenplay about Mary too. I'm kind of working on that one a little bit. I haven't really finished it, but I'm working on that. Well, it's finished, but it's not finished. It's got to be redone.
My guy, Mary Wells, you're talking.
Yeah, but Mary Wells. So Mae James Holler, who had been her PA and one of her just best friend, traveled with her, and she said he was very persuasive, and she just wanted to run the other way, but she just gave in after a while, I guess, and she tried to, just make the best of it. She had 3 kids. Cecil was very overbearing. Mary was a free spirit, loved to have fun. And she loved her children dearly. Wonderful people, all of them. But Curtis and his wife were not marriage material. And just, this is the problem with having to get married. Sometimes it's the worst idea. It's a great idea for the child sometimes, but sometimes not. And he visited Mary on occasion, and she poured out her heart about how she was having issues with Cecil, and just, and he had her recording different things. I'm going on a side trip here, but her career really took a hit when Cecil took over. I hate to say that. Unlike when he eventually divorced, he and Mary divorced, and then he married Linda, and they recorded together as Womack and Womack, and he did a much better job, I think, with Linda, and they really sang well together. But he was pretty tough in raising his kids. He did not want his daughters singing Sam Cooke songs. He was very worried about that. He just did not want them to get into that. He always sat with his front to the door. He never had his back to a door. After Sam died.
He didn't want his grandchildren. He didn't want Sam Cooke's granddaughter singing their grandfather's music.
That's right.
No.
That's right. Well, and not because he loved Sam. I mean, he wouldn't have had a career without Sam. He discovered all the Womack brothers. And Bobby, I mean, Sam saw the talent in Bobby above all. Yeah. But he sent him, I think the funniest story is he sent him to get some tutoring from James Brown's band. And they would call that the army, because, James was notorious for being a tyrant with his musicians. If you were one note was wrong, it's like he'd throw things at you. He was a maniac about his performance had to be perfect. And Sam knew that Bobby was going to go through a lot of grief with James, but he said he's going to come back and he's going to be just a phenomenal musician after that. And he was prophetic, and allowed for Bobby when he gave the Stones "It's All Over Now." Bobby thought, wow, why did he give them my song? And after Sam died, $1 million for him. He said, man, Sam just knew. He just had that sense. So when Zelda tells me, well, Sam didn't have any business sense, Sam was a visionary. He just couldn't envision. He knew something was up, but he couldn't envision the danger he was in that night. He did not see this woman as leading to his death.
Right. And so I know we veered off a little bit. We can get back on the death aspect.
My fault. I'm a divergent thinker.
Okay. So Sam, of course, he has his funeral in Los Angeles. There's also a funeral in Chicago where he's from. Muhammad Ali, Etta James, and others got to see him. Mavis Staples, I believe, sang at his funeral, as did Ray Charles sing at his Los Angeles funeral. And interesting enough, Muhammad Ali, and Sam got Muhammad to record an album once, The Gang's All Here. And Muhammad said himself, because Muhammad is a boxer, and he saw and said that if Sam Cooke was Frank Sinatra, this would make the news everywhere. People would have investigated it. Etta James said that it looked like Sam's neck almost was broken, or his nose was broken of some sorts, and you could see people were saying there were marks on his hands. But when we looked at, there's one photograph that we have of Sam Cooke in the doorway at the Haciend Hotel.
Yeah.
And this was actually seen by Dr. Cyril Wett when he did the documentary Lady Shot Me. It looked like there were marks on Sam's legs that were not mentioned in the autopsy report.
Again, let's get back to this police chief and the crime scene, because the coroner's office was corrupt. I've been talking with an author of a book about the murder of George Reeves, who played the TV Superman. That's another instance of a suicide that was not.
Uh-huh.
And I won't go, because I'll get off on that tangent. But mobsters were involved with both of the women he had been involved with. One, Costello, Frank Costello, dated the girl that he was seeing, and then Eddie Mannix, a mob fixer for MGM Studios, who had people killed routinely since the 30s and 40s. His wife had an affair because he had a Japanese mistress he wanted to keep. So they had this, everything taken care of in his life. And George Reeves had to go and screw it up by, cheating on his mistress with another woman. So anyway, to get back to that. So the coroner's office has been suspect for a long time. And there were a number of lawsuits over both coroners. And so in this autopsy, which I have the full autopsy inquest report in my book, and I have the diagrams, the bullet wounds, and the different questioning, and of course it's a lot of it just ridiculous in what's left out. So if you look at that photo, you can show the photo again, because if you do that, I can just go through it as you're showing it, so people could see. Maybe that might be a good way to go with this.
So this is okay. So sorry about that.
Yeah.
So let's see. This, I'm going to try and click on another page.
Well, let's just look at that right there. Look at his kneecap. Does that look like anybody's normal kneecap? That's not a broom. That's a broomstick, which if you hit a broomstick hard enough, it will disengage from the corn husks or whatever is sweeping the floor. That is not damage done by a broomstick, by a 59-year-old woman. Secondly, if they're wrestling on the floor, how would she get his knee if he's on the floor with her? You wouldn't get the kneecap. Secondly, I don't know if you can see, but here's one thing I really want to highlight for you, and I don't know that we can see it here. One of the clippings that I have expanded in my book, Sam Cooke, The Truth, as I was researching with Lana Rawls, going through her boxes and boxes of clippings on Lou, she saved things on Sam too, because the three of them were best friends. And she had lunch with Sam at the Brown Derby a week before his death. And she said, I could have very easily, he wanted Lou and her to go out with him that night. And Lou Jr. was not feeling well, and Lou Sr. had just come off the road. In fact, he was supposed to be on the road. And Lana said, if I had been home alone, I would have been there with him. And she said that's always haunted her. Lou Sr. never got over Sam's death, never got over it. Changed him in many ways. But the thing is, they knew he was murdered. They knew that this isn't what happens. So now one of the things, the reason I mentioned Lana is one of the clippings that she had of Sam was she collected everything from black newspapers across the country. You did not see Sam Cooke and Lou Rawls covered in the white mainstream media the way they were in black newspapers, like the Chicago Defender, for example. She had a ton of articles from there, and from the California, the Sentinel, which was a black newspaper out of Los Angeles, still in existence. And when you looked at the right side of his face, there's a picture of them at the mortician's office, and his brother Charles and David, I think his other brother might have been there. One of the other men might have been LC. They're looking at his wounds on the right side of his head, and they were massive. And apparently Alan Klein became so upset at the Chicago funeral, Sam's body not being covered, and people seeing these wounds, he made sure it was covered in glass in Los Angeles. He demanded that. I don't know who in the hell he was to demand a funeral like that. First of all, he and Sam never had a contract. Let's be clear about that. He called himself Sam's manager. Sam never referred to Alan Klein as his manager. We have it on a recording from a DJ on the East Coast that Sam said, I don't have a manager. I am my own manager. I make my choices. I have spokespersons. I have people who do bookings for me, but I don't have a manager. So that in itself is very, very telling. But why was Alan Klein so upset? And look at his hands. Here's the other thing. You can see his hands mangled.
Mm-hmm.
His niece said to me, my uncle had the most beautiful hands. And look at that. And they knew, and I have this picture blown up in my book so you could see it even more. Dorothy, they kind of sneaked her in so she would be there when Barbara wasn't there. Dorothy, by the way, was even at the Copa, sitting at the table with Barbara, not near Barbara, sitting at the same table, and Barbara didn't know who she was. She said, oh, they're people. And Barbara actually met her when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction thing happened, and she started to talk trash about Sam's parents. And Sam's sisters took her stuff, threw it in the hallway, and shoved her in the hallway and said, you need to get out of here. Because Hattie, his sister, was ready to come to fisticuffs with Barbara. She and the family did not get along. That she showed up with Bobby Womack in Sam's Rolls Royce that Klein bought. Sam didn't even
clothes.
Rolls Royce. He was trying to get rid of it. He was not a Rolls Royce guy. Yeah. So, and wearing his clothes. Yeah. The audacity. And of course, man, Bobby's just young and stupid and thinking, well, I say young and stupid as a moniker sort of, but we're all young and stupid, right? When we're young. And maybe he's thinking in his mind, he's paying tribute to Sam, but that's not what it looked like. It just came across as being really disrespectful. Yeah. Very disrespectful. And the way they came in late, walking up the aisle, arm in arm, the man who discovered him and his brothers gave him everything. Now he knew before he died that they were together. He knew that because he'd heard musicians would talk to him. And Sam did not talk about his personal life to very many people. But there were a couple of people that he did share things with. And I'm not going to give it away here, but it's in my book.
Sure.
And they knew that the two were living separately. As I mentioned, he lived on Santa Barbara Avenue, and she lived down the road from the Hacienda, which is probably where the thing about her car, why she was asking if anybody saw her car, came in. Because she was one of the people she was going with was a bartender down the road from the Hacienda. And by the way, talk about the spirituality of how things happen. I was living with my kids in a house in Inglewood when I was first writing this book, and man across the street that I talked to all the time was a black sheriff from the 77th that was his territory. And he said he knew that the story that his own department put out was bogus, because he said nobody in their right mind would go to the Hacienda.
Right. And that was another to that point too. Why would he pass up, according to the official story, all of the other fancy hotels to go to the Hacienda, which was a known place, I guess, for ill repute? And also, as a married singer, he signs the book in his own name. That made any sense. And then I think it's also important to point out, no one at the Hacienda Hotel actually said they heard gunfire, according to what I've read. Yeah.
So, according to what his daughter told me, she and Cecil visited us. And
which daughter?
Linda.
Okay.
February. Yeah, you're right. I should specify. So, a couple of things. And I'll tell you about J.W. Alexander and his involvement in setting this whole thing up and how they found certain things out. But J.W. Alexander, and this is what Sam had found out about the, his items of, well, his business being registered in JW's name, publishing and everything with, not JW's name, in Klein's name, with J.W. Alexander physically taking these to Reno. And the story that J.W. told the family is that he was paid money. He had no choice. He couldn't say no. He felt that they would kill him if he had gone against them. They did not accept that. They said, you could have told Sam. You could have warned him. Tell him to get out of the country for a while. Do something. But he didn't have to die for this. You did nothing to help him, and he did everything to make you a partner. And why was Alexander involved? Because he and Lou Rawls had been in the Pilgrim Travelers together. And so Lou trusted him. And if Lou trusted him, then Sam generally, but the thing is, Lana told me if Lou had had any idea, he would have killed J.W. Alexander. He said, I have no doubt that my husband would have killed him because Lou just loved Sam and he just never got over this. So registered these faulty documents and told the family. And now the reason he told the family all this is because he had a dream that wasn't a dream. He felt he was awake. And in the corner of his room, he sees Sam Cooke dressed all in white, sitting in a chair, asking him why. And it freaked him out so much because he said, I'm not asleep, I'm awake and I'm seeing this. And told the family this and begged forgiveness. As I said, they didn't give it to him. And said that he'd been given money, registered these titles. And Linda told us the other thing he told them was that Sam was killed in Klein's limo. And in my book, I'm very clear about this. The last thing Sam Cooke heard on Earth, and he might not have even been conscious, was Klein, according to J.W. Alexander, Klein telling him, because Klein was in the limo. Klein didn't do the shooting. Klein always had two men in the back of the limo. Hal Blaine told me that. If you went across the street, you had to go in his limo. So he had these two Goombas in the back of the limo. And the last thing Sam heard was, who works for who now? And then threw the N-bomb. And that's where Sam was killed, in the parking lot. So as Sam was getting out of his car, they dragged him out of his car.
So they beat him up when he was getting out of his car.
They beat him up as he's getting out of the car and as they're putting him in. And they beat him so ferociously. And if you could see the damage to the side of his head, he was probably unconscious. And it's possible that he was just going to have a beating, but maybe he was in such bad shape. He's a little guy who's 5'9" and $160. He might have already been dead of the beating.
So can I ask you that? Let me ask you this. Where did they kidnap him then? Where did it start? It wasn't at the motel, obviously, because supposedly, I read in your book, Johnny Morissette, who I don't believe is still alive.
No, he's not.
But his son is still around?
He's not talking to anybody now.
Okay.
I think that there are a lot of people who have come forward that don't want to talk anymore. Even Dorothy got to the point where she said, I'm just going to keep some things to myself at this point. Sure. But Johnny Morissette had told him that a phone. Okay, so after Stan Ross left Martoni's, the bartender allegedly, I don't know, I don't have a lot of backup on this, but allegedly the bartender said when Sam was sitting at the bar, a phone call came in for him shortly after Stan left, and the phone call told him to get to PJ's, and he was in trouble. And allegedly, according to Johnny Morissette Jr., his dad had told his mother this, and his mother had told him after his father died that he said, I'll be there, don't worry, I'll be there. And it's quite possible they booked Sam because Sam had cash on him. Now, this idea of Sam waving cash around, let me just revisit that for a second. Does that make sense?
No.
That here's a guy who he's been making money for a while. All entertainers have cash on them because they were paid in cash. My brother played in bands. He was paid in cash. That's how you were paid.
Right.
That Sam is drunkenly waving money around is not who Sam Cooke was. That just doesn't fit in with anything. I've interviewed, I don't know, 50 people and read countless documents, periodicals, books. That's not Sam Cooke. Sam was not flashy to that extent. Did he like nice clothes? Did he have a great camera, a car? Yes. That was every, person of money and esteem. Of course, you're not driving around in a VW Bug. Of course, you have a nice car and you have nice clothes and your kids are well dressed. And he lived in Los Feliz, which is still a very nice part of Los Angeles, kind of an older part now. But did he flash cash around? I don't believe that story. I think that story was concocted to fit in with where the cash came to pay for the cover-up to Bertha Franklin and to Crystal Chen Young. Because how did they get these women to go along with the story? They paid them. And on top of all this, Bertha Franklin got disability payments claiming Sam Cooke beat her. I mean,
right. She sued the state.
Let me tell you something. Just to get unemployment today, you better have a better story than what she came up with. Absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
All of it.
So he got a phone call to go to the place.
Yeah. Sorry.
So basically, Sam got a phone call to go to that place, to that party.
PJ's. Yeah.
Right.
PJ's was a mobbed up nightclub in Santa Monica Boulevard. Yeah.
And supposedly, where I think Lisa Boyer probably got a ride, was supposedly got a ride from Sam to go there, or he was going to bring her.
The story is that Walter Ward of the Olympics and Johnny Morissette were both there. And so that fits in with Johnny's story. And both Johnny and Walter told the same story to people, not being taped. Told this story to people in the industry and to people who worked with him, that they warned Sam, don't go with her. She's with LAPD. She's bad news. And Sam knew who she was because of RCA. So see, she was just like Klein worked the label against the artist. He's not an accountant. He worked the label against the artist and figured out how he's going to profit. She, played both sides. She would do work with LAPD and get paid off to, so they could arrest a John every now and then or other prostitutes. She was never arrested for prostitution until a year after. And I think there was some retaliation, different things, dragging LAPD into all this when they found out what had really gone on. That's just what I think. But she had never, she had not been arrested up to this point for prostitution. So other people, she got in bed with LAPD on that end. But then she's working for RCA in the back seats of limos. So was she a woman that Pete Bennett would know? Of course he would know her because he was doing A&R work. That's how the A&R guys got paid, was girls like Boyer, Boyer, I say, not her real name at all. And so when she asked Sam for a ride, now here's the interesting thing. If you read the autopsy inquest, she gives her address as a hotel in Hollywood that was notorious for call girls. It was on Hollywood Boulevard. And it was a sleazebag hotel where nobody stayed at the time except, it was not just low income particularly, but just a kind of another mobbed up sort of place where you'd find call girls and, I don't know. But that was her address. And so she told Sam to take her to the Hacienda. Well, how did he know where that was? Because Sam knew that area. Sam had at one point lived, what's that area? I'm blanking right now.
Baldwin Hills?
Yeah, well, no, near Ladera Heights, that area. Yeah, Baldwin Hills. And so he knew that area pretty well. And if you live in LA, you know everybody after a while.
Right, and it also destroyed. Bertha Franklin said so she didn't know who Sam was, which even Zelda said she knew it was a lie because that's the black part of town. So
of course, she knew who he was.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we look at that, and I know you've stated this prime suspect would be obviously is Alan, and I'm careful with my words, but he would be Alan Klein. So let me ask you, the motive obviously to kill Sam Cooke would be to get his music rights, his publishing.
That's a part of it.
What's the other part?
The other part is the conduit to the British invasion. If he could say, and that was the eyes on the prize that Klein had, if he could represent the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Dave Clark Five, who would have nothing to do with him, the Animals, who already had mob ties through Chaz Chandler, I think. I don't know, but then he could be on his way to being a millionaire. That was his key to success and validation. To get to Sam Cooke, first he went to Bobby Darin, and Bobby Darin's manager knew who Klein was when he did a little research on him and said, Bobby, no, he's not the guy for you. And so after he failed with Bobby Darin, then he went to Bobby's friend, Sam Cooke, and approached him after an appearance and said, what is it you want? Where are you going? And Sam said, well, the only thing I really need help with, he said, I'm getting some good bookings, but I'd like to do the Copa again, because the first time I went there, I didn't do well. Oh, man, I know Jules Padell. Well, the Copa is another mobbed up nightclub. He got him in the Copa. So how did Alan Klein profit? 6 weeks, Sam's body is barely cold. At the repast, he takes Barbara into a back bedroom and they talk for an hour. Why are you talking business at the repast? That's another question. Ends up, he and Barbara are the only ones getting any money. If Barbara can keep her mouth shut and go along, then she's going to get something. Of course, he ultimately screwed her over too, and her daughters. But for a while, it looked like she was in the money, right? At the end of the day, he built this empire called Abco, and it's something very telling that I'll point out real quickly here. I had a copy of Chain Gang that had Charles Cooke's name on it, and Charles Cooke's name, if you look at the book, and I have the titles of operation and the papers that were refiled that I got from the courthouse annex, Sam's name is on there, but Charles' name is not. J.W. Alexander's name is on a couple of things. But there's nobody else from Sam's family that is mentioned here. And so it's very telling. And so when Klein approached the Beatles and the Stones, he said, well, I'm Sam Cooke's manager. I'd like to manage you. Oh, we love Sam Cooke. And Sam had been in England and was a huge hit, had met, that's how we got Stone's song and all that. Now, Keith in his book, Life, said, we got better bookings. We were riding in limos, but the price we had to pay, I don't know that was worth it. Everybody Klein has worked for, think about this. Somebody has ended up dead. Yeah. Brian Jones owned the Stones. That was his band. He had the rights. He brought Mick and Keith aboard. Now, I'm not suggesting anything untoward on the part of Mick and Keith. Did they look the other way? I don't know. I'm not a detective. I'm not going to tell you that I have that information. I can only tell you that in 2 books about Brian Jones, they both say that this guy, Frank Thurgood, was on his way. He worked for Rolling Stones, Inc. Now, who was Rolling Stones, Inc.? Alan Klein. he decided to come up with this company called Rolling Stones, Inc., of which he was the president. Not Mick and Keith, not Brian. He was the president.
Okay.
He didn't write anything. Sent this guy Thorogood, who was supposedly delivering severance to Brian. Now, you mentioned Otis Redding going on and doing other recordings. Well, Brian and John Lennon were talking about forming a supergroup. Brian was looking forward to doing other things. At first, he was very hurt that he was thrown out of his own band, but then he came to the conclusion, and by the way, he was not on drugs at the time of his death. Nothing was found in the autopsy to indicate he was clean. Did he drink a bit? Yeah. Was he drunk? No. Was he an excellent swimmer? Yes. Did his pool even have a deep end? No. This Frank Thorogood shows up, and suddenly Brian Jones ends up dead at the bottom of his own pool. There's no money. There's no severance. Cash was missing from his bedroom, all kinds of things. The two women who were upstairs with Brian's dogs, who were always with him, were told not to talk. They were afraid to say anything. One of them left the country. This is the kind of stuff that always happens. It's same thing with Brian Epstein and Brian's lawyer. Both died within a short time. Always drugs blamed. And yet these were people who, Keith Richards did a lot more drugs than any of them. Actually, Bobby Womack, according to his road manager, told me he did more drugs than all of them put together. And they didn't necessarily die from that. They managed it. I'm not a proponent of drug use. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally against that. But I'm just saying, all these people, and it started with Sam. Sam's family has been threatened. Shortly afterwards, Papa Cooke got calls. We know where your grandchildren go to school. Don't you get involved with anything. They sent lawyers because nobody was getting paid. The lawyers were paid off by Klein and wouldn't show up. Over a period of many years, the frustration, the sadness over losing Sam and then getting nothing, not being able to claim heir. And he was a family guy. He wanted his family, again, put his father's name on the titles of operation that were altered by Klein. And just going to finish with this one thing. If somebody is dubious as to how did Alexander get away with this? Well, again, here's a spiritual thing. A guy I went all through grade school and high school with ended up being an attorney for the MGM Grand and for the resorts. He wrote a treatise on money laundering in Vegas. I asked him how something like this would happen. He said it was commonplace. He said it happened all the time because they didn't have any oversight. They didn't pay income taxes.
Sure.
And you could go in 1964, a black man walking in there saying he's Sam Cooke, white woman behind the counter.
Y'all look alike. They all.
Oh, yeah, I don't know who Sam Cooke is. Now, she would not know who Sam Cooke is. Bertha Franklin knew, but this woman would have no idea. And just like that, the titles of operation were changed. And Sam had found out about it because his youngest sister, Agnes, Jean's mom, this is what Jean said, he found out Sam had the flu. He was off the road.
Right.
He was going to go in and look at the books in the office and obviously came across the changed titles of operation, which were on file. And, Zelda would say, well, he once said he was going to do this, and I told him, you better not do that, and I wouldn't let him have it. Well, apparently she didn't stop him this time. And if JW did it, and she was so tight with JW, she had to have known. She was right there in the office. How would she not have known? So that's another bone of contention I have. So I really believe, and here's the final thing. One of the Womack brothers, and I won't say which one, who was still alive at the time, said that Sam didn't pay them. He had a bit of a grudge. He said, we never really got paid. Well, you're free to go and be managed by someone else if you don't think you're getting paid. You were free to sue. You're free to do anything. Why are you suddenly years later saying you didn't get paid? Maybe what you were saying is, I was part of this little coup that knew Sam was going to get a beatdown because nobody was getting paid what they thought they should get, because he's riding around in a Maserati and we haven't made it yet. And so, Sam would tell them, you've got to just be patient because this takes time and it takes a while. He's, look at how long I've been in this business, 13 years. It's taken me a long time to get to this point. He said, I got lucky with one hit song, but he said, it takes a while. And Mel Carter got lucky, but the Womack brothers were not as fortunate. Bobby did well because he was a songwriter. And so that the other brothers didn't get what they thought they should have tells me that this is not just something of an inside job, but that there was knowledge. Did they think Sam was going to get murdered? Absolutely not. Did Barbara think she's going to watch him die? No. But did she know that she's going to divorce him and there was no will and maybe she'd end up with nothing? I don't know. But I don't think she would want him killed. I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying they would want him to just give them more of what they thought they deserved.
Yeah. And I know, I've had you on for a little over 2 hours. I know you probably have to.
Oh, I didn't even realize it was that long.
Yeah, we've had a good time, but I do want to just give, if I could, one final thing to get back to J.W. Alexander. Do you think he was more complicit with it, so he knew that Sam was going to be taken out, or did you think?
No, I don't think he knew Sam was going to be taken out at all. I think he was afraid he was going to be taken out if he didn't go along.
Right.
And I think he thought that Sam would come to realize that he could no longer be an independent record producer. JW was not the brightest bulb. Just one little thing here. Sam and JW were not on the greatest of terms since the day that Jerry Fuller, songwriter, walked into the office when Sam was on the road with a copy, a demo tape of Travelin' Man that he had written for Sam. That was written for Sam Cooke, not Rick Nelson, initially. And J.W. Alexander listened to it and he said it was crap and he threw it in the trash can. And both men left. And Rick's bass player scooped it out of the trash, called up Rick and he said, I've got your next #1 song here, because he knew it was a hit. And Sam, when he came back and found out about it, and when he heard the song, he was livid. He said, man, you don't know shit about music. I'm going to just tell you what Sam told him, according to what I was told. He said, don't you ever make musical decisions without talking to me first ever again. He said, how could you have thought on any realm that was not a hit? That had hit written all over it. And here's Sam, who had no trouble with women. Here's another thing. Lee Silver, who wrote Short Shorts, big 50s hit, producer, traveled to Hawaii with Sam. Sam asked him, they were talking business, they were talking about the shows they were doing, and he said, if women come back here, please just, I want to just talk to you. I am really not interested in talking to the female fans right now. And Dorothy said the same thing, that very often these women would approach him and he just wanted to be with her. And she would say, these are your fans, these are your people. I said, I don't care about them, I want to be with you. So he had women, he never, ever had to chase after any woman. I mean, we're not talking about the Soul Stir days. We're talking about once he had made it. Women were everywhere. And look, same thing is true in sports. You know, I remember seeing lines outside the Lakers dressing room door. And I know this is true of other places. Women are there, you know, for whatever reason, thinking, well, you know, Maybe I'll have his baby and get some money. Maybe he'll just, love me and we'll go out, or, whatever they thought. Women chased after him, but he did not chase after women.
Yeah, that's like the Rat Pack and others like Rat Pack used to say they had to actually shoo the women away when they were.
Yeah.
Right, and that's not, it's the same, kind of what I'm seeing now in these allegations with these celebrities. It's like, did they really have to do all of this stuff? Like they had their pick. Women would, by their own admission, would come up to them. So
Yeah.
or spend time. Yeah. Well, this has been a very fun discussion. I'd love to have you on again sometime. We talk more about this. We're gonna have to do another part 2, but yeah, you gave us a lot to think about. I happen to also, and how we met was through LinkedIn. I saw your book, and I've been reading a lot of books, especially about the 2 books you have on Sam Cooke, and because I'm also interested in the music business, but I know it's a very tricky business. It's very corrupt. I'm also an author myself. I had actually, since we talked about you did Sam Cooke, I wrote 2 books on Hurricane Katrina. I wrote one, Katrina, Eyes Have Not Seen, Ears Have Not Heard, and I wrote another book on Bill Cosby and what happened with him, almost similar, but basic, and it's on Amazon Kindle like you did, about just what they did with the justice system and how they destroy the images, especially of Black male entertainers. Because Sam Cooke, there's what they did with him was an old stereotype,
right,
which is
blame the Black man for his own death.
Well, no, the stereotype is that the Black man is this sexual predator who is going to harm and assault women. Now, this was an Asian woman, of course, but usually it's a white woman of some sorts. And and he was this violent person. But we have to change the narrative with that. I do want to ask you one final question, though. Do you believe, of course, all of the suspects, unfortunately, have passed on? But did you believe you had enough information in your book to bring this to the authorities, to bring this to?
Well, here's the thing. The family, now we're not talking about cousins, sisters, brothers, well, the sisters have passed, and his remaining brother, David, they would love to see the body exhumed and the truth come out. His brother, I'm just going to say this, his brother Charles was dying of cancer when I was first putting this book together. And I was supposed to go to Chicago and talk to him, and he was just too sick. But his family told me he was so gratified that somebody was finally telling the truth, because there were previous books about Sam, and I'm not talking about Eric, but Eric's book obviously is aligned with mine, that we know Klein was involved. But previous books about Sam, make it sound like he and Klein were buddy and all this, and that nothing could be further from the truth. He was getting ready to fire Klein. He had $5,000. He had hired Jess Rand, his former agent, was getting him an attorney. He was going to extricate himself from Klein that Monday. And that's the reason they felt they had to kill him. Klein was not going to go up the river. When Klein finally did go to, and by the way, you showed me the Wikipedia thing. I want to point this out to you. Anybody can go on Wikipedia and write anything. After I put things in Wikipedia that were the truth about Sam, and do you know that somebody, obviously from ABCO, and ABCO, by the way, is, I don't know if they're dissolving, but they've sold the Sam Cooke music to United Music Group for licensing. But I forgot where I was going with this now. Sam, I totally lost my train of thought. I hate it when I do that. What were we talking about?
We're talking about you were talking about exhuming the body, and
yes. So his Charles was gratified that the truth was being told, but they would want this to happen, except that Barbara had complete control of the body. She is the one who had him put in a mausoleum that nobody could see. She was always afraid, I think, that somebody would go in. Mike Todd, somebody actually tried to dig up his body at a Chicago cemetery. I mean, I can't think of anything more gross. Why would anybody want to do that? But in his case, I think there are enough people that would want to see what the truth is. So
his
now,
daughters could do that if Linda or Tracy, they could request that.
Well, Tracy, they're going to say that Tracy is not of her own mind, which is what they've been saying, which I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they're saying. And Linda, I think, does not have the final authority because Barbara has bequeathed her estate to her granddaughter, Nicole, I think for the express purpose of making sure that something like that would never happen. She controls the estate. You would have to ask Nicole, and I don't know. I have not spoken with Nicole, so I can't speak for her. But I'm of the belief that she wouldn't have that happen because her grandmother would not want that to happen, because then a certain truth might come out. And again, he was shot with a 22, not with a 38. Whose gun was it? What did they know? I don't think Barbara would be the one accused. I think it would go to the mob. I think they would be looking at the connections. But that's just what I think. I could be told.
Anybody who has a legal interest in it, a family member can have it exhumed. And I can tell you who else could do it. It could be the Attorney General's office of the state of California, if they believe or were investigating a criminal act, because a homicide has no statute of limitations.
Yeah.
So if they did, now they probably wouldn't want to do it because it's going to cost money and time to do that. And obviously the parties who are supposedly are involved, unfortunately, they can't be brought to a courtroom and be tried. But certainly his daughters could request it, or someone, or I know he has other children, if they are legally his, they could also probably petition. I think it's something that would be interesting to do, because Sam Cooke brought a lot to the world, but also to especially for us as in the black community. His passing was tragic, and he didn't deserve what happened to him. Nobody did, but especially to die in those circumstances and have so much mystery surrounding your death. And the Los Angeles Police Department is very corrupt, what you said, because not only have they screwed up Sam's death, but also Biggie and Tupac. But I'd also say even RFK. Let's not forget Bobby Kennedy.
Oh, here's another one that's so clear. Bobby Fuller. If you think somebody committed suicide by pouring gasoline over his head without lighting a match to asphyxiate himself, which is what they claim, he was killed by Morris Levy. I have no doubt about that. His brother wrote a book about it, believing that. His brother just passed away. His sister-in-law told me that people called the house. Somebody called the house and threatened his mother if Bobby didn't, because Bobby was going to leave Roulette. And he was actually thinking about getting out of the music business altogether. And Tommy James would tell you, you didn't just leave Levy. When he and Levy parted, Tommy James thought he was going to get killed. But he said, I don't know why, but they like me. But Bobby Fuller, they disposed of him. And they dumped his body inside of his car, parked in front of his mother's house that they found the next day. He had gone to PJ's. Isn't that interesting? That night before. It's a notorious mob. It was a notorious mob joint. And Levy's people, the Genovese, all the people that took over LA after Mickey Cohn died, because Mickey Cohn and Chief Parker were sick as thieves. But his men were still running the city. And I mentioned, fire captain. I went to see Little Richard in Vegas, and a guy approaches me and he says, you wrote the book on Sam Cooke, because I did a book signing. He goes, yeah. He goes, well, that was my uncle. He was the fire captain. He was called to the scene. He did, John Belushi's death too. And he was told not to say anything. And he said to us, we came and told the family, he said, it's the strangest thing. The man was beaten from head to foot. And he said something about a woman, 59-year-old woman with a broomstick. He said that woman could not have inflicted that kind of pain, that kind of damage to that man.
Sam is 33 years old, so
right,
younger and stronger, yeah.
Right. So the fire captain, I'm just saying, things were not investigated. Larry Williams, Short Fat Fanny, I mentioned that in my book too. Same thing. His daughter said, Larry Williams felt the mob was trying to kill him. Somebody in that business was after him. He felt that he was going to die soon. And it wasn't, she said, it wasn't drugs. He really was panicked. So 3 members of the Olympics ended up dead. One guy was pulled out of his car in South LA, shot by LA sheriffs. Why'd all these, George Reeves, all these people in the industry, and MGM was notorious for covering things up. So it was film and TV and music.
Yeah. And you also mentioned, and I know we're going to wrap up a little bit, but you mentioned some artists, and this is even in a documentary, like Sammy Davis Jr. was even trying to warn Sam about some things. And I had heard, even Sam, well, this has been documented, Sammy almost was murdered by the mob, by Mickey.
That's in my book. Yeah. Well, Sam was supposed to be
Columbia Pictures owner, the guy named Harry Cohen. He was upset that Sammy was in a relationship with Kim Novak.
Right.
It was only because of Frank Sinatra that he intervened, because they took Sammy to the desert, and supposedly that's how he actually got his eye removed. But
and a lot of people, Frank actually covered for Sammy and pretended that he was having the affair with Kim Novak. You can read books, even on the internet today. I see pictures of Kim Novak. Oh, Kim Novak and Frank Sinatra were really tight. But no, he was dating Lauren Bacall at that time. So I don't think he wasn't going with both of them. I think he was covering for Sam for his protection. But Sammy Davis was supposed to be Sam's conduit to Vegas. You did not get into Vegas without a mob chaperone. And Sam told him, man, you know what? I respect the hell out of you, but that's not how I roll, basically. I'm my own man. And Sam was trying to tell him it doesn't work that way here, and this is who runs this town. And he said, well, I still think I can probably negotiate my own deals. He goes, that's not going to happen. I'm going to tell you right now. So Sam, maybe a little bit stubborn on that end, but maybe he just was going to let that lie for now. He wasn't in a hurry to do anything in December. He was looking forward to spending the holidays with his kids, with Dottie. She was, they actually had spent a weekend just before that, a couple weeks before that. He'd come off the road to see her. They went to Redondo Beach. They were supposed to go hear Les McCann at, I'm trying to think, the Lighthouse, I think it was. So, I mean, he was looking forward to life, and life was taken from him.
Right.
33 years old.
33. And you mentioned in the book too, I just meant one last point on Lloyd Price and another gentleman by the name of Leo Effort, who was from New Orleans. Well,
that's Leo I was mentioning, Leo Effort, yeah.
And he told the story about how he heard Sam was killed because he was friends with a guitarist named Speezy, I believe, or Spees, and he explained what happened. But Lloyd Price, very interesting when you brought him up, and I didn't mention this. Lloyd Price had a business with partner who was also co-wrote songs with him, Harold.
Right.
Yeah, I think his name was Harold Price, if I'm not mistaken. And what happened was Harold ended up getting killed in a shooting at a nightclub that he
was killed by the mob too.
Right, and his death remained unsolved, and Lloyd moved to Africa.
Right.
And
he scared the hell out of him, he told me.
Yes. And
Yeah.
Lloyd was involved with Don King and getting the Rumble in the Jungle set up with
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali, because Lloyd was close friends with Ali. So it's interesting connections. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. That's right. Lloyd was so scared of what was, well, because it was next to Birdland. And was it Genovese who owned Birdland? I think it was. These guys, I mean, these guys, the FBI followed all of these guys. They would watch them from offices across the street of where they played cards and stuff. They knew everything that was going on. I don't know why these guys were allowed to operate in plain sight as much as they were. You know, that's what really gets me, is that scene in The Godfather where you see Al Pacino shooting the guy in the restaurant in broad daylight, throwing the gun down and walking away. Well, that really happened.
Right.
That was Mickey Cohen's lieutenant. And so, well, what happened to that guy? Well, they arrested him. Okay. Then they let him go.
Right.
You don't let a guy go who's killed somebody in broad daylight. Oh,
Yeah.
but
I mean, even Lucky Luciano was working with the CIA during World War II.
They were. Yeah.
So
They went into those. I used to watch that. It was a great documentary series on mobsters on Reels. I even talked with the guy who produced that, and I talked to him about Sam Cooke, but we never made any deal on that. Which the story needs to be told on film. You know, not the stuff you see that's the ripoff of it and the false narrative, but. And even the night in Miami, as well acted as it was. And I have nothing but mad respect for Regina King, but I told these folks, I said, that's not where these talks happened. They happened at Dolphins of Hollywood.
right.
John Dolphin had these guys in, at night they came and they talked in his club surreptitiously. Nobody knew about it. It was very quiet. And this didn't happen in a nightclub in Miami. You know who was in Miami? The mob. And my friend said my attorney friend, they were in boats, docked off what is that one? The hotel, the Devu, forget, it starts with a D, where the fight was. And the mob was at the fight with Liston and Ali. And so there's always been some question, was that a legitimate fight? I remember my dad watching that fight. He sure as hell thought it was legitimate, because he jumped up and spilled beer all over the drapes. And my mother was screaming. He's like, did you see that left one? My dad loved Ali. My dad my dad saw Joe Louis in Chicago when he beat Schmeling. He thought Joe Louis was the greatest fighter ever, until he saw Ali, and he said he might be the greatest fighter ever. I don't know, but he said
my grandfather said the same. My grandfather said the same thing. Joe Louis was the greatest. My dad thinks it's Ali, because that's the generation. But yeah, I of course I grew up with Mike Tyson and Holyfield and Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis, those guys. But I love Tyson. But yeah, I loved Ali. That fight with Liston, supposedly, I know had been tied with the mafia.
Yeah.
Ali, the first fight, Liston was getting cut up, but the second fight, what they call the Phantom Punch, where Ali hits Liston in the right part of the head, and they thought Liston took a dive. But
you never know. Boxing, very corrupt sport.
Yeah.
Very, at least it was. I don't know about now. I don't follow it now, but
no, it's still corrupt.
Yeah, I believe it. It
may not be. It may not be.
What isn't corrupt? I mean, look, we're in corporate America running things, and the insurance industries and big pharma, all of this. I mean, it's just a mess, all of it. But so when you think back to Sam Cooke, no internet, no cell phone,
Yeah.
They thought they were going to get away with this in perpetuity. They thought nobody will ever know. Well, no, we know. Now we know, but see, the thing we need is the DNA. And the thing we need is to look at his face and his kneecaps and to ask why. Because I called the coroner's office. Why weren't these things in there? And he said, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. And of course, he never got back to me on that. He didn't want to talk about it because he knew that coroner, you know, from Noguchi on before him, they all covered. They all covered.
Mm-hmm.
And the police chief in the coroner's office, I mean, there have been noir movies about this, and because they're based on real things happening. That's where you win a case. You get a corrupt coroner to be paid off. This guy's not making that much money.
Right.
Give him $500,000. Yeah, was he hit in the head? I must have missed that. You know. So yeah, really, really very sad. Very sad. And they kept saying in the autopsy inquest that he was drunk, and the hooker said he was drunk. It was a very small alcohol level, and Stan Ross said he had the same drink for the 2 hours they were together and barely touched that. He was nursing that same drink. It was all watery.
Is that in the autopsy report?
That is in the, yeah.
The blood alcohol content was below the legal limit?
I don't know about the legal limit, like, you know, what the legal limit is now and what it was then. I don't know. You're a lawyer. You would know that.
Right. Yeah. Well, in Louisiana, we say it's 0.08. So yeah. I don't know what it was back then.
I'm from Wisconsin where, you know, I was drunk on my 21st birthday. I shouldn't even tell this story. But I didn't know. My friends just kept buying me shots. And I think I went to a stop sign, and this wonderful, nice young cop who this would never happen today, thankfully. And I don't drink now. I'm not a drinker at all, really. But he said, "Did you miss that stop sign?" I said, I think I noticed it too late. You're right. And showed him my license, and he said, "Oh, it's your birthday today." I said, "I know." Yeah. And he said, "Well, listen, you just go straight home and you be very careful and promise me you're not going to miss any more stop signs." I said, No, I'm almost home. I don't usually admit that to a lot of people. Now everybody knows, but I was 21, and like I said, young and dumb, right? We do stupid things when we're young. I'm glad that the world has gotten better about that. I'm glad that, because drunk driving is a horrible thing. And
it is.
I've had students who've lost relatives to drunk drivers, and it's awful. So it's something I never did again. I'm fortunate nothing ever happened. But Sam Cooke was not drunk that night. That's my point that I wanted to say there is he knew what he was doing. Stan Ross said he was completely cogent. He wasn't drunk. They talked business very specifically. So everything she says in there is so erroneous. Even her directions to the hacienda were impossible. It was an impossibility. She's giving an east and west when you would have gone south. So nothing she says is accurate in there. And his clothes were actually found 2-3 blocks away, underneath some steps of another motel. So, you know, all of this, no chalk lines.
No formal investigation. They did a coroner's inquest. So Bertha Franklin was never really tried. Was not tried. There was no trial. So, I mean, yes, at any moment, it's a coroner's inquest. It's not a court of law where if she were found, let's say, not guilty, then the case, then really she can't be tried again, obviously. But if there were anybody else that were involved and did it, let's say, and those people were still alive, they could be tried. But yeah. But BG, it has been a pleasure having you on, talk with you for the last 2.5 hours. It was like
I've enjoyed it.
We will do it again. And, you know, I'm a writer as well. And, you know, maybe we can always, perhaps after we can always talk about collaborations. So
that would be wonderful. I'm always open to collaborating. I'm working with some people right now in the industry. And I would just love to see this made into a feature film that was able to, I mean, I think it would take a really great actor. The play South Central featured a guy who played Sam Cooke, who pulled it off really well because he captured his energy. But I don't know if he's still in the acting profession or not. That was a while back, about 10 years ago. But But, you know, there are some fine actors out there who could really bring Sam Cooke to life, and people in this, people who, you know, factored in his life. And just for the truth to be told, again, it's never been about the money. It's about the truth. And that's why I decided to rename the book that. One More River to Cross was a great gospel song, but this is really the heart of the matter. This is the truth of the man.
Right. And if you are ever able to, I know you're still in touch with this Mr. Cooke's family, would you send them my wishes? And
I sure will.
If I could, I'd like to one day speak with one of them just to tell them, you know, how much I admire their loved one. So, yeah.
I certainly will do that. I will pass that along, Gavin, and we'll be in touch, definitely. Thank you again for having me on. As you can tell, I could talk about Sam Cooke till the cows come home here. It's an old Groucho Marx expression. I don't know why I'm using it, but it's because there's just so much there, and our legal justice system. I don't know that things have necessarily gotten any better. I hope that they have in some ways, but in some capacities, but in others, I don't know. George Floyd tells me that we have a long way to go.
Oh, yeah. A long way to go. Hopefully a changes will come. So
right. Thank you, Gavin. Have a good day.
Thank you, BG. And this has been another edition of Random Topic Thursdays with Gavin Richard Presents Un-Soul-Ved, which is a segment on Sam Cooke. And you can buy BG Rhule's book, Sam Cooke, The Truth, as well as One More River to Cross by Sam Cooke, and our other book, which is the autobiography on Rhule, the title of which is, could you tell me?
Love is a Hurtin' Thing.
Love is a Hurtin' Thing. Yes, one of his hit songs. Yeah, Rhule. So we thank you for tuning in, and right in time because June is going to start Black Music Month. So I'm glad we're talking about Sam Cooke, the King of Soul. And you can learn more about Sam Cooke by reading these books, ladies and gentlemen. And this has been another edition of our show, Random Topic Thursdays. And if you love me for my time, pay me for my time. Drop something in the CashApp, PayPal, or Zelle. As you know, YouTube has us on a shadow ban, so we try to get this thing going. But shout out to all who are watching via Rumble and also on X. And BG, thank you once again. All right.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Gavin. God bless you, and God bless you. And to your listeners.
God bless us all. Be one, be safe, and be blessed. I'll holla. Peace.
Peace out.
Whoever you are, wherever you are, hope you are blessed and doing safe. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings, family. Of course, I'm tuning in. You see me without the glasses off today. But if you're looking for some opportunities, particular advertisement opportunities, then look no further at the link at the bottom to my email address. You can hit me up for advertisement opportunities. We are supporting and promoting your businesses here on this channel. You can also, if you would like to donate and subscribe to our Patreon, a link is at the bottom as well. So you have multiple ways in which you can advertise with the platform by emailing me when we go on through our live stream. You also have access to premium content, those that want to see premium content that you will not find here on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, as I am suspended probably by now. You guys can check out the Patreon at link at the bottom. But advertisement opportunities, definitely email me, gavin.grich1@gmail.com for rates. And for the Patreon, it is the same as the YouTube channel. It is channel GBoot2786. All right, I'll holla. Peace.